So Nellie, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'd like to start at the beginning. I just wanted to know when you first realized you wanted to work in fashion, when you realized that was a career that you could have, because I know you actually got a degree in business at San Francisco State originally before going on to Parsons. But even earlier than that, was that a calling beforehand, or was it really when you hit to Parsons?
Yeah, great question. I've been fortunate in the sense that I was, from a really young age, I think I was, maybe around 8 or 9 years old, where I had known this was something that I was really passionate about. And I kind of grew up, in watching what was happening in the 90s with all these incredible shows and interviews where I would see Gianni Versace and Yves Saint Laurent and, in the 90s when Todd Oldham and, all these incredible designers were having such a unique time. And it was actually, for me, living it, I didn't realize what a significant time it was in fashion and what a impactful decade it was. And so I felt very fortunate to have the experience of growing up at that time and watching, what was unveiling itself in the industry at that time. And Calvin as well. I mean, for me, Calvin Klein was a brand that I had watched very closely and loved. So
you actually didn't go straight into fashion design. You did something that I wish more fashion designers would do, is when you went and did a business degree. So was that to placate parents, or were you just really, really smart and like business first, pleasure after with the design aspect?
I wish I could take the credit for that. No, I had a family. My father was an entrepreneur and also in the luxury space. He had a yacht dealership, and he worked with this Italian manufacturer and worked very closely and was one of the largest yacht dealers in the US. And he started his business from the ground up. My parents had left the revolution in Iran, and my father had gone to high school and college in the East Coast, and so he was quite familiar with the US. And so half my family went to Paris, and then the other half came to the US. And when he came to the US, he really had to start again from zero up. And so he's always been an entrepreneur. And I think that, so in the sense I was guided by him. It wasn't a decision that I made on my own. He said, I'll support you in terms of whatever you're passionate about. And if that's, being a designer, then I'm 100% behind it. You just need to understand the complexities of business. And it was one of the best things I did, because design and product is critical, but you have to understand what to do with that product. And, there is a significant part that you don't really learn in school about, the true business of fashion. And that's where the business degrees kind of come in handy at this point in my life.
But I mean, that also along the same lines, unlike a lot of people, well, maybe not right now considering the climate, but, so many designers, particularly, when you were coming of age, were like, I'm going to, when it became the star designer thing, like, I'm going to launch my own brand right away and make it in the world and become like Galliano or Lee McQueen or whatever it might be. Whereas you went ahead and you took some time, you trained at Calvin Klein, you did some time at Donna Karan, you were John Varvatos. So you didn't go straight out into launching your own brand. Was that because you didn't feel you were ready? Did you want to make those mistakes at a different house? I mean, what was the thinking behind that? What made you decide and go that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really look at it as making mistakes. I just wanted to get exposure to different companies and also different size companies. And I think that, Calvin was the first job that I got out of Parsons, and it was an incredible team and an amazing time. And there was no way I could pass that up. But I wanted the experience. I wanted to know what the interworkings were like on a level of Calvin, which was obviously a corporate company, and it was going through the transition of being purchased by PVH, and even understanding the complexities of the licensing deals. And it was interesting for me to be there and just to understand the inner workings. And then Donna Karan, I had met Donna Karan when I was in college, actually, at a fragrance signing. I had stood in line just to be able to ask her a question.
So you waited in line with Donna Karan to see Donna Karan, like, to sign your perfume?
Yes. So she had just launched a fragrance, and she was at, I believe it was Macy's in San Francisco at the time, and I was in business school there. I stood in line to meet her, and, I thought if I could ask her one question, and I mentioned to her, this is my dream. It's something I want to pursue. In the meantime, before I get to working in the industry or getting to design school, what do you suggest I do in preparation for this dream I have? And she said, work as much retail as you can, and she explained that it's critical to understand who your customer is and just to understand customer dynamics and, the psychology. And it was one of the best pieces of advice that she had given me. So when I was in Parsons, I was actually interning for her. So that's where I got the opportunity to kind of come back full circle. I had actually told them the story when I got the job. But it was amazing also because even though, this world of Ralph Lauren and Donna Karan and Calvin and the generation of these kind of American powerhouses, they were all so unique in their own right. And so it was really interesting for me to see the difference in how each company was operating and just to be exposed to the inner workings as best I could, being in my 20s at the time, and
well, what did you take away from those? So those two, and then your other really formative was John Varvatos. What would you say are like the kind of key pieces that you took away from that experience and brought into your own company when you launched in 2011?
I mean, it's incredible, incredibly valuable to be able to work in a different business and to see, you learn a lot about what works, also what doesn't work, to inform you, okay, these could be potential pressure points as you build a business. And I mean, John was a really incredible experience for me because it was obviously smaller business than Calvin and Donna, but Varvatos was scaling and he had a very clear identity in terms of who he was, his customer demographic, and he really embodied that. There was a true authenticity to who he was with regards to the product he was creating, and it was genuinely what he believed in, and there was a beauty in that as well. That I think on a smaller scale you feel a little bit more impactful than when you get kind of to the corporate level. Even though of course there's no question that the DNA of Donna Karan and the DNA of Calvin was, very vivid, and very clearly defined. But it was interesting to be a part of a smaller company that was scaling quite quickly.
Oh, so you've done Donna Karan, you've done Calvin Klein, you've done a John where you've seen how to scale. You launched in 2011. Again, we're still feeling the ripple effects of the recession of 2008, 2009.
Yes.
What made you feel like this is the time for me to launch a brand, and what did you feel was the part in the market that was missing that you felt you could really bring a voice to and a perspective to?
Ignorance. But to answer your question, it's honestly, ignorance was bliss. I didn't understand the difficulties of what was coming down the line with the economy in terms of what the retailers were going through. And so in a way, it was also the best time to start the business because I had to figure it out. I knew I had to take that leap and just start it and go for it. And as much as it was terrifying and all of the things that I'm sure every entrepreneur feels when they, first take that leap, it was in essence, in retrospect, one of the best times for me to start the business because I had to learn to, and as a matter of fact, it's helped me so much during, what we're experiencing with COVID and the complexities of, and the challenges that businesses are faced with, because I started it in a devastating economic time. And so I learned a lot, and I learned to be very resourceful at that time. So as much as it was ignorance at the time, it ended up being, a fantastic and very knowledgeable experience for me to have started the business during that.
Did you always feel like you wanted to have your own brand? Was the other stuff like recon, working at the other places, like the research, and that you were like, I'm always going to at some point launch my own brand. I have my own story to tell?
Yes, I was always quite adamant, and it was the dream for me, and I always knew I wanted my own brand. And to answer your question about, was I looking at a specific niche that was open in the marketplace, you learn that, I don't think you walk into it having it all figured out, and I think that that's one of the lessons that I've learned over the course of these years is that you don't have to have it all figured out, at the jump and in day one. I think there's a process to even understanding your own DNA, and working for houses that had such strong, identities in terms of their design aesthetic is an incredible thing to walk into. And now having to do that for yourself and understand, well, what are my strengths and what is it that I bring to the table that is a niche in the marketplace, or, speaking to a certain audience. And I don't think you come into it sorting that out in day one. It's very much a process. And I think and it's an ongoing process. I think it's just something about life that you're constantly learning about yourself, and on many levels, what you're good at. And as a designer, I think most of us know where we're most passionate about. And mine wasn't doing evening gowns. My graduating piece out of Parsons was a white suit. So, I've always been, into very clean architectural lines and quote unquote minimalistic approach. And so it's always been a part of who I am. And I think it's just about kind of honing your own abilities and then continuing to grow from them and learn how you can evolve.
No, I agree that I think if you wait until you know everything to start a brand, you'll never start a brand. I think at some point you just got to get out there. I mean,
Yeah.
quote unquote failures are part of the learning process. I think you actually learn sometimes more from those missteps than you do from your successes. But
I agree.
But you were very successful. I mean, you were I think profitable after just 3 years. Is that right? Tell me how that happened. That's exceptional.
Thank you. One of the things that I learned early on, a lot of, I built the business on my own. I didn't have financial backers or any kind of investment. And you learn to sink or swim very quickly, with your own money. So I realized, I think in our industry, there's a lot of, here's a perfect time and what's going on in life right now. But I think there's a lot of excess and there, I was seeing a lot of waste in these brands that I had, worked for and across, not just businesses that I had the experience with, but across the industry. There's so much waste in development and so much waste in the manufacturing process. And so I've always kept a very edited line. I mean, even to date, 10 years in, we still have a very tight edit when you come into, each season with us. And I've always believed, our drop-off rate going into manufacturing is less than 5%. So I think that this is something that I just kind of learned to figure out quite early on so that we weren't, from a financial standpoint, wasting money and then learning to make sure that we were utilizing, our assets and how to build the business in a very organic and healthy way. And so we were always working within our means, which is not easy in our industry.
Yeah, that's really not easy. That's definitely not the norm within the industry. You have so many brands. They're like, okay, we have to go show in Paris, or we have to we have to have a great PR team, or this, that, and the other. Talk to me a little bit about how you did actually build the brand. I mean, you talked about having a lot, low waste, but how did you get the word out about you? How did you build it? And especially, kind of those tips and tricks that you could give startups and young designers who are facing the dilemmas they are now, because you're in this interesting position. You're not a tiny startup. You've been in it for a decade, so you don't have that sexy new designer thing going on about you, that's everybody loves to write about, and yet you're not a huge name either. So you're in this interesting middle space, and I'm curious to how you exist comfortably in that space.
To answer your question in terms of where we are, 2019 was the biggest year in the history of our brand in terms of just revenue and profitability. And I think that I realized quite early on, especially in building a luxury business, there is no overnight formula. And I don't know one brand, to be honest with you, who's had overnight success, and comfortable with being okay with enjoying the journey and not wanting to, overnight be this. And most of the brands that do have the overnight success, so to speak, quote unquote, come crashing quite quickly. And I think the advice that I could personally give, and the advice that was given to me, is that you want a slow burn, and most importantly wanted to make sure that the product was there. I'm a very product driven person, and I think the way that I was able to build it and gain kind of the success we had with regards to the retailers, because we've got really fantastic retail partners, has been very personal. You do have to get out there and communicate the brand, communicate the product, communicate what makes you different from your counterparts or your adjacencies that you're on the floor with. And so it is on some level very grassroots in terms of communication to your sellers, to your buyers, to the press, but I wanted to make sure everything we did had integrity. It wasn't for me just about finances, or it was about the integrity of the product, the integrity of the brand, the integrity of, how we were communicating. And so that was something that I know it takes time, and I know, and it really is a journey in my eyes. So I feel, we're continuing to build it, and times are changing. So we're evolving with them as well.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, as particularly for a brand like you said, yours, you would kind of define it as minimalist, but you have a great and interesting color palette. A lot of the, it's minimalist, but there's always kind of a twist to the pieces that you have. There's always something that kind of makes them stand apart. Also, I think the materials that I'm seeing that you use are also kind of the higher end and definitely clearly not mass. You're definitely very clear about that. Was for you, was that the important aspect of it because it's so minimal that you really be careful about the materials that you're using and where you're sourcing from?
Absolutely. 100% of our materials are sourced in Italy, and we do our manufacturing in Italy as well as in New York, because it was important for me to support also local manufacturing in New York. There's still these incredible contractors that were trained by actually Ralph and Calvin and Donna. And I thought it's really important for brands to support and make sure that they're also still continuing to make a living and have a place in New York City. So we split on the manufacturing. And then material wise, I've worked with some incredible Italian mills that they've been trained generation after generation. It's usually family-owned businesses, and I love the know-how and the knowledge and what they bring to the table and getting to partner with them. And they've been very generous to work, with us and on our business. And so 100% material is one of the first points of what I look to when I'm in the design process, color and fabrication. So that's a big part of my personal process.
Then let's talk about that final step, the moment where they click to buy. I know that Neiman Marcus was a definite hub for where you were selling. What are you thinking about e-commerce and selling online and D2C? And I mean, because I figure you would have to pivot a certain amount considering the current climate. What are your thoughts going forward as far as that's concerned?
I think all brands have been aware of, the importance of the direct-to-consumer model. As a matter of fact, we were building out our e-commerce during this time, and we're actually going live with it in a week. Yes, so it's been something we've been working on for the past 6 months. So the timing was very interesting with everything happening in the world right now. But irregardless of the immediate impacts of what we're seeing as a result of the impact that COVID has had, it's been a time where I think it's critical. I think also the consumer is shopping in a different way. So it's important for brands to understand their consumers' needs and buying behaviors. And I think that clients also want to feel this connection to the brands and to the messaging of the brands. And so I think it's really important to have this connection that through social media and so many other channels is now available to us, that in a way that 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was not. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a very good point. I think storytelling is going to be crucial going forward because people are going to be buying, because of what the brand stands for, or the connection they feel with the brand as much as they will because they need a new, suit or whatever. I think it's going to be much more who they feel that fundamental connection to. And which also brings me to the point, I know we talked about this, earlier, this idea of this rewriting fashion, the codes. It's been something that some people in the industry have been talking about, like shifting when things actually drop into stores, or, the idea of having fashion shows, or the idea of when sales are going on, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you fall on this idea of really shifting on this fundamental level, the way the fashion is done?
I think it's critical. I think we have an opportunity right now to really shift the calendar that we all knew for so many years was dysfunctional. And here's an opportunity for us to really be more aligned with even the client's behavior and the consumer behavior and what's really going on in the months that are dropping. It made no sense to drop, winter coats in the middle of, the summer and vice versa. So I absolutely think it's a critical component that, I'm constantly talking to our retail partners about as we speak, and internally, really looking at how we want to restructure market going forward and the deliveries. And so this is something that we are taking very, very seriously. And I'm hoping that the industry does take shape and does take form. I know Dries Van Noten has been a huge advocate of this, and I couldn't agree more.
I want to circle back around to the storytelling, because I thought it was quite an interesting point when I was researching you for this interview, that you had Karen Elson for your last two lookbooks. And when you're talking about storytelling, I mean, she's a woman of a certain age who's got a life outside of fashion, you know, musical career, etc. I feel that there was a real intention when you picked her, and just wondering kind of the backstory and the thinking behind that. When you talk about the muse for your brand, what was the thinking behind her, and that idea of who the woman is for your company?
Yeah, that's a great question. We really do take a lot of consideration in terms of who we are, you know, shooting for the collections. And Karen was 100%. For me, she represents the DNA of the brand, and I really very much champion, you know, women who kind of march to the beat of their own drum, and she has this strength about her, and I really admire what she's created in her career and her musical career with her family. And you know, she has so many different dimensions going on in her personal life, and she's a very strong woman. And for me, those are characteristics that embody and not only the brand, but it's something that I respect and have always aspired to be more like women that have this characteristic from a very young age. I had a very strong mother, and Karen to me embodies all of these characteristics, and she's an incredible human being. So it was an honor to work with her as well.
Well, I mean, you're also a very strong woman. I'd be remiss not to go through this entire podcast with you and not talk about the fact that you're actually a competitive boxer on top of running your own business. So can you explain that a little bit to me? Because that's an interesting juxtaposition of career choices. So tell me a little bit about that, and how does one talent influence the other?
Oh, it's such a big part of who I am. It was random, to be honest with you. I was a teenager, and I always was athletic, but I didn't really like going to the gym, and I was getting bored. So I had walked past the studio. I thought it was a cardio boxing class, but you know, to my knowledge later, it was actually Team USA.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I had gone in and, you know, somehow convinced my mom to let me sign up, because, you know, I think I was 14 or 15 at the time, and ended up being pulled aside from one of the head trainers, and he said to me, "You have what it takes to fight." And I thought he was crazy. I just, you know, the idea of getting punched in the face was not something I was looking forward to. It actually terrified me. But for some reason I was really drawn to the sport. The more and more I was in there, and, you know, I was watching live fights that we would go to with, you know, the other fighters that were in the gym. And sure enough, 4 months in, they had given me my first kind of, it was called they're called smokers when you're green, so to speak. And it was kind of your training wheels into fighting. And I fell in love with the sport, and it was something that I was consistently doing. It was almost a second job. You know, I was at Parsons, I would be training 6-7 days a week. I was competitively fighting. By the time I was working for Calvin Klein, I had the opportunity to fight in Madison Square Garden. That was a really pivotal moment for me, and a very cool moment. And, you know, I have to be honest, boxing has given me so much value in life and taught me so much about business that I think athletes as a whole can really relate to. And I think you have to have a certain level of discipline to be an athlete, and a certain level of dedication. And it's no different in starting and building a business. And so there's a lot of parallels between the two sports. But I have some great stories of, you know, being in Madison Square Garden and, you know, having my Calvin team there, having, you know, my Varvatos team supporting me. It was a really, and my family, it was a really incredible time for me. And I got to fight I don't know if you've ever seen the film The Fighter that Mark Wahlberg and Christian Bale played in, and Christian had won the Oscar for it. So he was, you know, it was a portrayal of Mickey Ward, who was an incredible Irish fighter and in the Boxing Hall of Fame. And I had actually fought his relative in Madison Square Garden that night. So. And
you beat her.
I did beat her.
I love that you talk about, you know, you said the sports as if the fashion career is a sport as well as the actual boxing. First of all, do you still doing boxing on the side? Do you still keep it up?
I do. I still train. I definitely don't competitively fight. I'm too old for that now.
But I think fashion, the idea of running a fashion brand being, you know, a sport, like a high level athletic sport, is very much a good analogy, a good comparison. Just before I ask you my 5 generic fashion questions, I wanted to ask you, so looking now that you said 2019 was such a great year for you. Granted, everything's kind of up in the air now. What's your goal at this point? Is it just to stay alive? And what do you want to do going forward? What's your quote unquote 5-year plan?
That's a great question. I have to be honest with you with regards to business, in relation to what's happening right now in the world. It's been nice to just stop. I think there's two parts to working in business. You're working either in your business, which is, the day to day and the hustle and the constant go, especially in our industry, as we all know, it's just nonstop. And then there's this part where you need to pull back and work on your business and look at it from a full 360 perspective. And I think it's not an easy thing to do for, I think, any business owner, because you're usually kind of in the trenches with the day-to-day operations. So this time has been really valuable for me to kind of pull outside and see the business from a broader perspective in terms of how we want to evolve it and what opportunities are there. So, I think it's going to be a challenging year for all industries across the board, but I think you've got to kind of look at that and realize, there's definitely also silver linings in there. And I think you just have to figure out on an individual basis what that is for your business and at this time, and how do you move forward from it, and kind of look close enough. There's definitely a lot of opportunities, and there's that resilience that comes from, I think even just being a fighter, we don't give up. So, you gotta keep it moving. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. No, I think that you're right. I think I've spoken to a number of different designers over the last couple of months who've all said that this has been putting aside all of the heartbreak that's been going on, it's been a great time of reflection for them as far as, and time to work on their talent and their process and their business. So they really have been, that part of it, have enjoyed it to a certain extent. All right, so I'm very curious to see what you have to say for my 5 generic fashion questions. So
okay.
My first question is, what is your favorite piece of clothing that you own?
Well, that's a tough question. I love I have many. Because I also love vintage. So I have a great deal of vintage collection, but from my own brands, the knitwear. I mean, I work with a lot of women that are hand knitters that work for the brand, and the craft and the way that they kind of work with us, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it can take anywhere from 80 hours to 200 hours to make these sweaters, and quite intricate. And so those knits feel really special to me, especially because of who's made them and the love that goes into the work that these women do.
Well, I mean, that's definitely a behind the scenes story. You've got to start putting up on your Instagram feed for sure. That's definitely something to share with the world, because I know people would love to know more about that. All right, I'll check out your knitwear for sure. All right, so then sort of off of that, not everybody has a lot of money to spend on clothing, but if there was one piece you would recommend that a woman or a man invest in, like really put money aside to buy that particular piece, what would that be?
In general, with regards to just, any type of item? Well, I think also a really great, I'm going to go back to the knits, to be honest with you, because I think both you and I are wearing one right now, and so I think that a really beautiful knit, and most people are, if you think about what you wear on a day-to-day basis, you're usually wearing a knit within your wardrobe, whether it's underneath a suit or, back to a skirt, or for men, back to trousers and a jacket, or so I definitely feel like having a really beautiful kind of fine gauge sweater that you can transition from, back to your denim all the way through to kind of in a more formal manner is a good investment piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. Who is your favorite designer, living or dead?
Ooh, great question. I respect all designers, good and bad.
Good answer.
Of just knowing what they go through. Yves Saint Laurent was a very big inspiration to me. I mean, he's just an incredible talent and resonates. So if I had to choose one, can I choose 2? Alaya as well?
Yeah, that's a very lethal combination. I think those they're both, clearly both men love women and love designing for women. I think those are good choices. Okay, second to last question. What trend will you never follow?
I don't think anyone should ever follow trend, period. I think you should follow you, and what works well for you as an individual. And don't worry about what the masses think is, appropriate or in, or, I'm a huge advocate of just, really kind of understanding what's best for you as an individual, what makes you happy, what brings you, an element of joy with what you're wearing or living. And so I'm anti-trend.
I absolutely agree. And I think also as women and men too, as you get older, you kind of figure out what works for you and then just buy that in bulk.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, last question. What do you love most about fashion?
Everything. I mean, even the good, bad, I mean, honestly, every component of it. I think, being able to do what I love every day is the best part of, I don't really consider it a job. I feel like I get to build something with amazing people that I get to work with, not only internally with my own team, but even outside with the amazing talent from photographers, stylists, art directors, and individuals that we get to work with on a broader perspective. And then the women I get to meet that we dress. I mean, I've met so many incredible human beings across the board. So I think that's the best part, getting to do what I love. And then the people that I get to meet along the way that are also just incredible, inspiring human beings.
I absolutely agree with you. Nellie, thank you so much for taking the time.
No, thank you.
Give Mika her Chew Toys, his Chew Toys back.
I know. I'm so sorry about that.
That's fine. That's great. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks so much for taking the time, Jessica. I really appreciate it.